Okay, morning everybody. It's about 10 to 9, which means I'm late. Which I'm sorry about. Today's a Shchedi Shalom. Today's Lamed Menachem. And of course, it's the first day of the Shchedi Shalom. And what do we know about today? So first of all, we start saying the David Hashemayri. The David Hashemayri, we say, I believe, 51 days. Because we stop Hoshana Rabbah, which means 21 days. And then 30 days of Elul is 51. Even though Elul is only 29 days, but we start today, Lamed Menachem. So it's a total of 51 days. It reminds me of the fact that the first year that the Yidden got the Teda, they were not 49 days, and then the 50th day was Matan Teda, but there were 50 days, and the 51st day was Matan Teda. And I have a shtickle kashe. There are people in the Welt who sailed over the Shameri and Shmini Atzeres as well. So maybe they start the second day of Shchedish, or maybe they say it for 52 days, I don't know. But Apisvara, we should be the ones saying it Shmini Atzeres, and the Welt should not be saying it Shmini Atzeres, and I'll tell you why. Because the Welt makes a big deal out of Hoshana Rabbah, because it's the Gemara of the Chesima of the judgment. Chabad makes a big deal out of Shmini Atzeres, because Shmini Atzeres has to do with Klita, with Avoida. In other words, by us, the high point of Tishrei is Shmini Atzeres. By them, the high point of Tishrei is Hoshana Rabbah. So it would stand to reason that we should say Dod Hashameri on Shmini Atzeres also, and they shouldn't. But obviously, we don't know everything. We don't understand everything. Tomorrow, Mitzvah Hashem, we're going to start saying the Tzrika Pitlach, which is a Meseder from the Hilga Baal Shem Tov, which the Frierdiker Rebbe brings down. That's starting from the second day of Shchedi. They should say every day Tzrika Pitlach. And you have 29 and 9 is 38 days, right? 38 times 3 is 114, which leaves over 36 kapitlach. And the 36 kapitlach we say on Yom Kippur, 9 before Kol Nidre, 9 after Kishma Shalamita, 9 after Musaf, and 9 after Ne'ilah. But there's one other thing practically about today, which is the idea of taking Lehislamit. When do you stop long Shefer? It's fun aloshin. Hayitaka Shefer be'ir va'am lo yecharadu Aryeh Shog mi lo yira Aryeh Rashateves El Rashashani Yom Kippurim and Hoshana Rabbah. We start to blow Shefer. And the Welt blows 4 sounds. Tashrat, we blow 10. Tashrat, Tashat, and Tashat. So it is that the first day of Shchedi should blow Lehislamit to practice. So the Rebbe studies this idea of taking Lehislamit. And basically the question is, if a person needs to prepare, he needs to prepare. Why is there a minhag of practicing? And the Rebbe links the Shefer. He sort of indicates that today's practice is one Kel HaShefer, like the Kel HaShefer of Ne'ilas Yom Kippurim. You know, it's one cry, Agishrei, that we cry out. And it's connected to the Kel Pashat of Yom Kippur based on the idea that, so to speak, Nos Chilasam B'Sefer, meaning to say that in a certain aspect, today, Lamed Menachem, which is the very, very beginning of the season of Tshuva, Tshuva Taton, Tshuva Yalah, Chedesh Racham Vaslichis, Melech Pasoda, Chedesh HaCheshben, and all of these things. This is the first day. So it's the most initial moment, which from a practical point of view means we're on the lowest level, right? We're the least involved. But Mitzad Lamaila, there's a pshitas about it. There's something very simple about today, and that simple is connected to the simple of the Ne'ilas Yom Kippurim. And we want Mashiach now. We want a relationship with the Eibishter. We want to be Yidden Chassidim and Evdei Elokim. In the Kavana. Okay, that's in lieu of a Milsa de B'dichase. Pardon me. Now, yesterday I gave a class, and yesterday Meli came. He's been a little bit sporadic. I don't blame him. It's his vacation and it's summer, so he doesn't always make it. And on top of that, I'm not always on time. In fact, I'm always not on time, unfortunately. And we read a big shtickle. Like we're learning Perek Tezayin of the Maimeh, chapter 16 of the Maimeh, Perek Tezayin. And we learned a huge chunk. We learned about half a Perek on Erech. And the discussion was the idea of B'chol Mo'edecha. In other words, yesterday she had 2 points. Point number one, that the reason Isarusa de Latato, Isarusa de Le'ela works is Kachalo B'Ritzeni. Our ability to do anything that should, quote, mean something to the Eibishter Kvayach, and he should respond to us, isn't based on our legitimate access to him. There is no such thing as legitimate access, but because he wanted that we should matter to him. Because he wants that we should matter to him, we matter to him. But then there was a second point, that even though it's true that the whole phenomena of Isarusa de Latata, Isarusa de Liela, has to do with the fact that he has a rotzen, there still has to be some kind of relativism, some kind of an erech, some kind of a proximity between our rotzen, between our Isarusa, our arousal, and his response. So the question became, if a Yid is relating to Lakus on a level of Ein Seif, a level of infinity, what kind of an avodah can set a person up to have a connection to Ein Seif? We're finite. And the Rebbe introduced us to this classic idea, which our Rebbe spoke about so many times, the principle of B'chol Mo'idecha Mo'id Shalcha. Every person has their own personal infinity. B'chol Mo'idcha Mo'id Shalcha, your own personal infinity. Your own personal infinity. That even though so to speak, the infinity of a person isn't infinite at all, but since relative to him it's going out of his keli, it has a property, it has an aspect, it has an inyan of bli gavul. So our ma'od, which is not really bli gavul, it's a relative bli gavul, it's bli gavul for me because I'm going out of my kelim, sets up the ma'od ha'elyon, a true infinity, which is, in other words, he gives us like we give him. We give him our best, he gives us his best. Those two bests are not the same, if you understand. This was yesterday's class. Now, 2 things. I thought I remember 3, but I looked over my notes. 2 points that came up yesterday in the class that I want to revisit. Yesterday I did a lot of reading. Today I'm going to basically lecture. Maybe if I'll have some time, I'll finish the perek. I don't know. But there's 2 things that I want to touch on that we spoke about yesterday in the class. The first is this idea of different kinds of ahava. The idea of love is having a relationship with Hashem, a passionate relationship with Hashem, an emotional relationship with Hashem. There's a level where a person's love and emotional relationship with Hashem is in his own vessels. It's contained within the person. In other words, it's not resulting in the person transcending himself, going beyond himself. The second love is a love which is bigger than the so-called keli, the vessel of the person, and the person is, so to speak, going beyond himself. And that's Kalais HaNefesh. It's called in the perek here, B'chol Mo'edecha. So what I want to emphasize, and the Rebbe does touch on it, is that different emotional responses are determined by different meditations. In other words, it's not a person thinks about Hashem one day and he loves him in a limited way. As a person thinks about Hashem another day and he loves him in an infinite way. That's true. But the reason for these different responses has to do with the difference in the meditation, the difference of the hisbonenus. And I want to, so to speak, I want to do this inside out, I'm going to do this backwards. Understand that any time we're speaking about a human being, and we're asserting, we're underscoring, we're saying that the person is capable of infinity, of believable, even if it's a believable shaloi, b'chol mo'edecha. That phenomena means that we're talking about the neshama and not the moach. We're talking about the soul and not the mind. The idea that a person can go beyond limit, beyond his limit, beyond all limit, is not possible in as much as he's a human being. The human being, or the consciousness of the human being, is the mind and the heart and the senses, basically. And of course, the body and the bodily function. The mind, the heart, and the senses are the more fine components of what the human being consists of. They're all limited. But we have a soul. We didn't create the soul. And the truth is, we don't fully control the soul. We can only control to a limited degree. The soul is our infinity. Or to say it in different words, the soul is a piece of the Eibishter which is planted within us. The idea that a human being express something infinite, like tshuva or mesiras nefesh, and in this case, ahava b'chol moedecha, is really not the human being doing that. You can't do infinity. You can't even do your own personal infinity. You can open up the personal infinity the Eibishter planted inside you. Or to say it like I like to say it, the difference between a finite love and an infinite love, a finite love has to do with the mind, and an infinite love has to do with the soul. Now understand, a finite love means I use my mind to arouse my heart. An infinite love means I use my mind to arouse my heart, but it's a different heart. A finite love means I'm using my mind to arouse the heart, which is mine. It's consciously mine. I have a heart, I have emotions, I have a capacity to feel. I direct my mind toward feeling a certain thing in a certain direction, in a certain aspect, and so forth. The idea of infinity is true because infinity was placed in us. So even though it looks the same, I'm using my mind to arouse my heart, but it's a very, very different reality. In the first, I'm using my conscious mind to arouse my finite heart, both of which are gifts that the Eibishter gave me, and they, so to speak, belong to me. They define what I am. And in the latter case, I'm using my mind to allow my soul to emerge. The soul is a gift from the Eibishter. The soul doesn't have the same limitations, the same obstructions, the same conflict that the mind does, and that the heart does, and that the sense that the conscious person does. So it's not a question of arousing the soul, it's really a question of revealing it, of letting it emerge. And once it emerges, so to speak, the neshama does its own thing, which is an inyan of ligavul. So when you talk about the whole phenomenon of emotional involvement with Hashem, so there's the combination of the mind and the heart, but there's a very, very big difference between what's called here in the Tanya, amongst other things, pnimiyas halev and chitzenias halev. The outer heart is aroused by the mind. The inner heart is released by the mind. It's exposed by the mind. But when it emerges, it's not the mind that determines the emotions in the heart. It's what the Eibishter put there. That's the neshama. So that's a very, very big difference between what's called chitzenias halev and pnimiyas halev. And by the way, since today we're starting to say L'Davar Hashem already, let's point out that you have l'cha alma libi bakshu fonai es panecha avaya avakesh. And how does Chassidus explain this pasuk, es panecha avaya avakesh? That the outer heart, l'cha alma libi, to you, to the outer heart, speaks the inner heart. And the inner heart says to the outer heart, bakshu fonai, seek my pnimiyas. And then the outer heart responds, es panecha avaya avakesh. All year long, we serve Hashem on the level of the outer heart. When it comes to Yomim Neiroyim, and I guess on some level also in Chedesh Elul, we seek to serve Hashem with the inner heart as well, with the pnimiyas halev. L'cha alma libi bakshu fonai, es panecha avaya avakesh, that you use, the outer heart seeks the love for Hashem, which is not coming from the mind and the heart, but coming from the mind and the soul. So that's my first point. My second point is that Chassidus says that the way the ahava, the relative loves happen, the outer love and the inner love, the love that's from the mind to the heart, and the love from the mind to the soul, has to do with how we meditate, how we contemplate, what we do in our hisbonenus. And I've said this many times. I actually compiled a list sitting someplace on my computer of different levels of hisbonenus. There are limited levels of hisbonenus. There are levels of hisbonenus that are beyond limit, and then there are absolute levels of hisbonenus. In other words, in general, you can divide hisbonenus into three groupings: hisbonenus and mamalik kalalman, hisbonenus and seviv kalalman, and hisbonenus and atzmas amhus. The hisbonenus and mamalik kalalman really is a very selfish hisbonenus. I'm thinking about Hashem in terms of what He gives the world, what He gives me. And I'm not even thinking about what Hashem gives me that I can't understand. Because there are things that Hashem gives the human being that are an infinite gift, like the very fact that we exist. but it's thinking about Hashem in terms of what Hashem gives me that I'm able to relate. What's called in Chassidus, Ki hu chayecha. He's our life. Nafshi v'sicha balayla. I want to live, so I want God, because God is my life. There's something very subjective, very selfish, very personal about that. I love Hashem because of what Hashem does for me. And here in this Maimed, this is called Ava Misyasheves Belev. Second line for the top of page 246. When I contemplate Hashem in terms of what Hashem gives me. So I'm not thinking about what the truth of Hashem is. I'm thinking about Hashem in terms of the gifts that He provides to me and for me. The gifts that Hashem provides to me. And the gifts that Hashem provides for me, I appreciate and I value. And they're not about sacrifice. To the contrary, they're about dependency. They're about appreciating Him and needing Him. But it's for me. That's called a limited hisbonenus. Then there's a second level, which classically, basically, you would call the hisbonenus and save of kalam, where you're still talking about what Hashem gives me, but the hisbonenus is in what God is versus what Hashem gives me, in the insignificance of myself, and the insignificance of creation, and the insignificance of the Chayes Eliki, which is invested in me. In other words, the middle level of hisbonenus is a contemplation in how what Hashem is versus what Hashem gives me renders myself insignificant. So I'm still thinking about me, but I'm not thinking about me in terms of what Hashem gives me. I'm thinking about me in terms of what I am relative to what He is. And of course, this affects his batlus, akula kamei k'lo chashiv. And you could argue that that's the second hisbonenus here, but although momentarily I'm going to tell you a third hisbonenus. So Chassidus would argue that when I think about Hashem in a different way, I get a different reaction. When I think about Hashem in a finite way, the response is a finite response. When I think about Hashem in an infinite way, the response is an infinite response. In other words, a response of going out of self. And then there's a third hisbonenus. The third hisbonenus is in Hashem Himself, like Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, Ein Eid Muvadi, and so on. Hanech Hashem Elokecha, Asher Eitzesicha, Me'eretz Mitzrayim, Me'beis Avodim, and so forth. This is a contemplation in God which has nothing to do with creation. I'm not thinking about what Hashem gives the world, or how what Hashem gives the world is insignificance to what He is, the truth. This is the highest hisbonenus. And the highest hisbonenus, of course, leaves no reality, right? I'm not thinking about myself at all. I'm thinking only about Hashem. And I'm thinking only about Hashem. There's a four-letter word. I don't know if it's 4 letters or 5 letters, whatever the case is, it's a 4-letter word. It's a word which makes us quite uncomfortable, and that's the word emes, truth. What is the truth? And after a person asks himself, what is the truth? Becomes the next question. I want to be in pursuit of the truth. I want to go after the truth. I want to have the emes. And for the emes, you give everything away. But on this level, you're not thinking about what Hashem gives me. You're not thinking about what Hashem gives me is insignificant. You're thinking only about the Eibishter. There's nothing but God. So Chassidus, of course, is going to argue, I just gave you 3 levels of contemplation in general. And there's different mishalim for each one of these hisbonenus, right? Like I said, I have a list someplace. If you're listening and you want that list, send me an email and I'll send it to you, Rabbi Paltiel at gmail.com. And with that, I'll send you the list. When you do a hisbonenus and what Hashem gives me, that is a ava misyasheves belev. When you do a hisbonenus of the insignificance of creation versus creator, and certainly when you do a hisbonenus in what the creator is, this is ava betagbedes godel, which is bigdula sein seif muhusei vatzmusei dekula kamei k'lo chashiv mamish. Okay. So there's different, like I said before, there's different levels of love. And in general, there's 2 levels of love. The level of the love, this is Yeres HaKedesh, Siman Dalet, which the Alter Rebbe refers to it. He actually quotes a few lines from that Yeres HaKedesh. There's Pchimius Halev and then there's Chitzenius Halev. And it's in other places in Tanya as well. Where one love is coming from the mind to the heart, the other love is coming from the mind to the soul. Now, one more thing I want to say on his bonus and Ava, then I'm going to move on to my second point, and that is that there is a caveat in all of this. There is a free radical, if you will. There's a discussion which you have in Hasidus, which is very difficult to know what category to put it in, and I believe you can put it into each one of the categories depending on how you want to interpret it, and that's the contemplation of Yesh Me'ayin. The hisbonenus of the way Hashem creates the world. In some Maimorim are part of the first category, the Mamale Kalalman class of hisbonenus. In other Maimorim, they're part of Seviv Kalalman, the second class of hisbonenus, and in other Maimorim still, Yesh Me'ayin is part of the third class of hisbonenus. So Yesh Me'ayin, so to speak, leaves you confused. If you're setting up different categories of hisbonenus based on the nature of the contemplation and the consequent emotional response, whether it's a limited emotional response, whether it's an infinite emotional response, or it's a response where there's nothing but God. And like I said, some of these come from the mind to the heart, and some of these come from the mind to the soul. There are different hisbonenus. Yesh Me'ayin sometimes is in first category, sometimes is in the second category, sometimes is in the third category. And this is the first thing I wanted to say as a follow-up to yesterday's class, that the difference between one Ahava and another Ahava ultimately is a difference between one hisbonenus and another hisbonenus. How am I thinking about Elokus? And this leads me to the second point, or another point. It's not connected, it's the second point. When the Rebbe discusses this idea that there's two kinds of love, a love which limits me, and a love which causes me to go beyond myself, which in this case he calls B'chol Ma'oidecha Ma'oid Shaloch, and he says this is a keli for the Ma'oid Ha'elyon. He uses two expressions, Le'ishtaba B'gufa de Malka and Le'istakolo B'yikora de Malka. It's 8 lines from the top of the page. Le'ishtaba B'gufa de Malka, Le'istakolo B'yikora de Malka. Le'istakolo B'yikora de Malka is mentioned in Tanya Yegeres Perek Tes. Le'ishtaba B'gufa de Malka is in Samach Vav, Ba'ariches Gedeilo. I want to talk to you about what these two things mean. They mean very, very different things. And like I mentioned yesterday quickly, Lishtaba B'gufa de Malka is probably deeper. Listakola B'yikora de Malka is probably higher. In other words, the story B'yikora de Malka is a more makavdika kind of idea. Lishtaba B'gufa de Malka is a more pnimistic or a transforming kind of an idea. In Samach Vav, there's a big arichas, a huge arichas. In the Hemshech Hashua Samach Zayin, it's like the last 100 pages of Samach Vav, in the old print, where the Rebbe talks about Neshamas Yisrael. I don't know how familiar you are with Hemshech Samach Vav, but Hemshech Samach Vav is about why the Eibishter created the world. And of course, he starts with Direh B'Tachteinim and he finishes with Direh B'Tachteinim, but there's 550 pages or whatever it is, 800 pages in the new print. So clearly it's a little more complicated than just Direh B'Tachteinim. For much of the Samach Vav, for a good portion of the Samach Vav, for probably 3/4 of the Samach Vav, the issue on the table is the purpose Ruchnius or Gashmius? Is the purpose Hala or Amshach? In other words, the purpose of the creation, Ben or Eved. Is the world about Tzaddikim or is the world about Kabbalah Seil and Bittul and Eved and Balei Tshuva and so on? And he goes back and forth, right? Who serves Hashem? Who fulfills the divine purpose more? The tzaddik who's so intimate with HaKadosh Baruch Hu that there's such a pnimius and a peacefulness about him, or the Eved and the Kabbalah Selnik and the Baal Tshuva and so on. And he struggles back and forth. First, he concludes, of course, that Eved is higher than Ben. The Kavon is Kabbalah Seil Bittul, and then he finishes off by saying that there's Ben Shenasa Eved. There can be a Ben, a person who's involved in Torah, but he has the mile of Eved as well. This is about 3/4 of the Samach Vav. The question is, why? What's the purpose of creation? Is it mitzvahs, or is it Torah, or to use different words, is it shuv, or is it ratzu, or ben or Eved? Okay, the conclusion is Eved, and then of course there's Ben Shenasa. The last 100 pages of Samach Vav, that means in the old print, it's exactly 100 pages from Tov Mem Zayin till Tov Kuf Mem Zayin, I think, or Mem Des. But in the new print, obviously, it's many more pages than that. The Rebbe is now talking about Neshamas. He's not talking about what the Eibishter wants, but Neshamas Yisrael. What do we get by fulfilling the Eibishter's purpose? Obviously, what we get is fulfilling the Eibishter's purpose. But as it relates to us, the Rebbe speaks about the principle of Yidid Tzedek Chaliyah. Right? The Neshama comes into this world, and it struggles and it goes to a higher level than it was earlier. And basically, this is how you would say it. A neshama's natural condition is tahara. The neshama's aspiration, the neshama's aliyah, is kedusha. Like it says in the pasuk, "Va'anche kodesh tihi yudli." You should become a holy people. How does this speak in the language of Kabbalah? The answer is neshamas Yisrael come from kelim, not from oir. And in many respects, that's a chesaron in the neshama. But in ultimate respects, it's the mila in the neshama that the neshama is in inyan atzmi, like kelim or inyan atzmi. They're pieces of elokus rather than reflections of elokus. But tahara means we're separate from the Eibishter, and our entire relationship with Him is that we're open to Him, but not that we're one with Him. Kedusha is oir, tahara is keli, and kedusha is oir. And the Rebbe discusses at great length the aliyah of the neshama from Mitzvah Eisias HaDibur to Eisias HaKsav to Eisias HaChakika, Chakika mitzad echad, Chakika me'evid alevid, and in each level the Rebbe argues that neshamas come from kelim madrega of tahara. And then he says the neshama comes into this world and it goes off from the madrega of tahara to the madrega of kedusha. Meaning to say that right now the best of our relationship with Hashem is our bittul to the Eibishter and our openness to receiving Him. And the kavanah is that through whatever is avodah, through Mesiras Nefesh and through His kafia, we should become one with the Ein Sof Oir. This transition from keli to oir is called lishtaba b'guf of the mal. Guf sounds like keli, right? But it actually doesn't mean keli. Guf of the malka means the king himself. In other words, not how keli is receiving oir, but how keli becomes one with oir. The neshama, which is natural condition, is only the madrega of tahara, should be zoichet to be omer elokus in the madrega of kedusha, not bottled to the Eibishter, but an expression of the Eibishter. Now, of course, the arichas of this deserves to be articulated, but the clock and the format are not allowing for it. But this is not the time and place to be ma'irich, but this is the nekuda. So, what you have to understand when you speak about leishtaba b'gufa the malka, that you're really talking about the person, the body, the vessel, the mind and the heart, the human being's limitation and containment and complexity. That's the guf. That's the person. And leishtaba b'gufa the malka is that it shouldn't just open itself up to receive elokus, but it should literally be transformed and become one with elokus. So this is of course, it's a big avoid. It's a pnimius deka avoid, because it's very transforming. You're making the keli into something different than it is naturally. The stakola b'yikar the malka is a very different thing. And again, I'm not doing either of these two things justice. I'm just giving you first I'll give you a Maram HaKoimis. You can go look it up and you can learn it. And I just want to give you a flavor of the two ideas, so you'll see how these two ideas mean such different things. The stakora b'karamak has to do with re'iyah, with seeing. And re'iyah is a very high level. But one thing re'iyah does not have is etzem. There's no guf, right? It's not a zivig gufni, it's a zivig neshika, a zivig ruchni. That's what re'iyah means. The stakora b'kar the malka, I guess you would put it this way. We want to understand. And our ability to understand is limited based on who we are. We can only understand things that are understandable, that can be understood. Right? Some things we cannot understand, either because of Chesed HaMasik, we're not smart enough. And sometimes it's not even about us, it's about Emek HaMusik. The ideas are beyond comprehension. The ideas are beyond comprehension. So a person wants to understand. So you have to ask questions, and you have to look for answers. And then you have to think about the answers, then you question the answers, right? The highest level of understanding, or at least one of the highest levels of understanding, is called Re'iyah. The Re'iyah Sichlis. Re'iyah Sichlis means there are ideas that I can't really put into words. I can't teach them to somebody else, and I certainly cannot defend them in a debate. But because of the preparation that one does before, the preliminary steps in trying to understand, they're open to, so to speak, understand things that they don't understand. They don't understand them because they can't prove them, they can't put them into words. They do understand them because they see them. They see them clearly. This is a re'iyah sichlis, it's an intellectual vision. And it's, so to speak, the level above the keli of the moyach, that is able to have this madrega of re'iyah, if it did the preliminary avoidus before the madrega of the re'iyah itself. In other words, our neshama has tools. The mind is a tool, the heart is a tool, the senses are tools. Our neshama also has light. The light of our neshama is the infinity of our neshama, but the light of our neshama is beyond the tools. It's beyond what we can control. I always tell you that one of the definitions of the word tool is that it's at your disposal, like a hammer. You can use it, you could not use it. But the oir hanefesh, the light of the neshama, I have no control over it. The Eibusha gave it to me, and it is what it is. It's that kolo b'yikara the malka would be that the light of the neshama of a person touches the light of a lakus. It's oir touching oir. There's no keli. That's why it's called testaklos. In other words, if I was able to grasp it and dissect it and analyze it and question it and explain it and prove it and argue it, that would be havana, would be understanding. Because it's beyond that, I'm relating to something which I can't fully integrate, I can't fully internalize, but because of the earlier refinement of the machshava and the moyach, through avoida, things that I don't yet know, I have a sense of what's called the re'iyah. That re'iyah is the eir haneshama touching the eir v'elakus. The maila is that it's very high. The chesaron is that it's very makif. It's very fleeting. It's not transforming. And that's the taishes takala b'yikar of the malka. In other words, lishtaba b'guf of the malka is raising up my keli to become like oir. Listakala b'yikar of the malka is abandoning the keli and relating to the eir of v'elakus through the eir of the neshama. The first process is very transforming and very pneumistic. The second process is very transcendent and very fleeting. So listakala b'yikar of the malka is a higher inyan, and lishtaba b'guf of the malka is a deeper inyan. But the way that Tzemach Tzedek brings both of them here, brings them together, is that they're both about his bonus that a person does that causes him not to have an ahava misyasheves belay, but to have an ahava which is bringing the person to go beyond himself. And these are the two things that I wanted to share for today's shi'ur, okay? Yesterday I read a bunch about B'chol Moedecha. Today we went back over it. I hope I was clear that the difference in the ahava, the difference and the difference of his bonus, and there's B'cholos 3 madreges of his bonus, Malek Kalalman, which is Kihu Chayecha, would be an example of Malek Kalalman. Ma'an Nesham, Malei Saguf, Kachakadosh Baruch Hu, Malei Sa'olam, and other things like that. Maybe even Hashemayim Esaprim Kevei Keil, Sumar Menechem Rubi Baraela. Then you have his bonus and Sevel Kalamin, which would be Yahalos Shema Deshem, Kiniskav Shmei Levadei, Heidaletz Veshamayim. In other words, they Narecha Velakusta Elames. And then his bonus and Atmas would be Shema Yisrael, and Anecheshem Velakecha, and Ato Haresa, and Yadai Tahayim, and so on. And then I told you that the caveat in this is Yeshmeyayin. Because Yesh Miyayin can be explained on the Mamala Kalaman level, on the Seviv Kalaman level, and the Atzmas level. And the second thing I talked about is I interpreted the difference between the Shtaba B'guf of the Malka and the Stakara B'yikara the Malka. So on Sunday, we'll read the very end of Perek Tezayin, and with Hashem's help, we'll begin Perek Yud Zayin. Okay. Good Shabbos and good Chodesh. We want